The blinding glare of the 80-foot LED screens washed over the congregation of 10,000 people, casting a celestial, almost sickeningly artificial glow across the auditorium. The acoustics in the building were a marvel of modern engineering, I should know. I personally approved the $15 million architectural budget to ensure that a whisper on the stage could be felt in the marrow of the person sitting in the very last row. Right now, however, it wasn't a whisper echoing through the cavernous space. It was the booming, baritone voice of my husband, Marcus, lead pastor, spiritual visionary. And as of this exact moment, a colossal fool, I sat in the front row, exactly where the dutiful pastor's wife was supposed to sit. My hands were neatly folded in my lap over my simple, unbranded cashmere skirt. To the untrained eye, I looked like I was in deep, reflective prayer. In reality, I was calculating the exact depreciation rate of the stage lighting he was currently standing under. Church family, Marcus began, his voice dripping with that practiced, synthetic vulnerability he used whenever he was about to manipulate the masses. He paused, wiping a perfectly timed bead of sweat from his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief. The Lord moves in mysterious ways. Sometimes, He calls us into new seasons, seasons of uncomfortable growth. He took a deep breath, looking down at me with eyes that held no warmth, only the cold, hard glint of a narcissist who thought he had finally won. Naomi and I have walked a long road together, he continued, his tone shifting into a patronizing octave, but her spiritual journey has taken a quieter, more private path, a path that no longer aligns with the heavy, demanding mantle of leading this global ministry. As your shepherd, I need a partner who is equally yoked in the bold, aggressive vision God has given me for this city. A collective, theatrical gasp rippled through the thousands of attendees. I didn't flinch. I didn't shed a single tear. I didn't even shift in my velvet-lined seat. I just watched him. Therefore, Marcus boomed, raising his hands toward the stadium lights, I want to introduce you to someone who has been a pillar of strength, a visionary for our media department. And now, my partner in this new, glorious chapter. Please, welcome, the new spiritual mother of this house, Chloe. The side doors of the stage glided open, and out stepped Chloe, the 24-year-old director of communications. She was wearing a violently bright, asymmetrical dress that was trying far too hard to look like haute couture, but the cheap tension in the synthetic fabric screamed fast fashion. Her heels clicked sharply against the imported oak floorboards I had flown in from a sustainable forest in Scandinavia. She looked out at the crowd with a smug, victorious smile, waving like a newly crowned beauty queen, walking down a runway of stolen validation. They stood together on the pulpit, the pastor and his new queen. They expected me to break. They expected me to run out of the sanctuary in a flood of hysterical tears, utterly destroyed by the public humiliation of being discarded like an obsolete piece of church furniture. Instead, I casually reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out my phone. I opened a secure, encrypted messaging app and typed a single, brief sentence to my lead financial attorney in New York. Initiate the reversion clause. Freeze all operational accounts. Lock the doors by midnight. I hit send. The screen briefly illuminated my face with a cold, blue light. It was done. The guillotine was suspended, and Marcus had just willingly placed his own head on the block. Have you ever watched someone aggressively dig their own grave, completely convinced they were building a throne? Before I tell you exactly how I tore down his counterfeit kingdom brick by brick, and how I legally stripped him of every dime, every car, and every ounce of dignity he thought he possessed, I need you to do something for me. Tell me in the comments below. Where are you listening from right now? Have you ever had an arrogant narcissist try to publicly destroy you, only to find out they messed with the wrong person? Drop a yes in the comments. And make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Trust me, you are not going to want to miss a single, satisfying second of this absolute demolition. To understand the absolute sheer magnitude of the mistake Marcus made tonight, we have to go back exactly 5 years. Back then, there were no LED screens. There was no private jet leased under the guise of missionary travel. There was only a dusty, abandoned retail lot on the outskirts of the wealthiest suburb in the state. And Marcus, a charismatic, silver-tongued preacher with massive delusions of grandeur, but absolutely zero credit score. When I met Marcus, he was preaching in a rented high school gymnasium. He had the voice of a prophet, but the financial literacy of a toddler. I, on the other hand, was the quiet, unassuming daughter of a notoriously private, fiercely guarded family that controlled a multi-billion-dollar commercial real estate trust. My family didn't do flashy. We didn't do lagas. We did land. We did generational wealth. The kind of wealth that operates invisibly, pulling the strings of the economy from heavily guarded boardrooms. I loved Marcus. Or rather, I loved the potential I thought I saw in him. I wanted to help him build his dream. But my father, a man who could spot a grifter from a continent away, I gave me one strict condition when I decided to marry him. You can fund his little theater, Naomi, but your name, and our family's money, never touches his legal documents. You own the soil. He just rents the stage. So I orchestrated a masterpiece of legal architecture through a blind shell company called Apex Holdings LLC. I purchased the 50-acre commercial lot out from under a corporate developer. I funded the entire construction of the $40 million megachurch facility. Every brick, every window, every fiber optic cable was paid for by me. Then I had Apex Holdings draft a standard, but ironclad, triple net commercial lease agreement. I presented it to Marcus through a third-party proxy firm. He was so blinded by his own ego, so entirely convinced that God had provided a miracle donor, that he signed a 100-page commercial lease without even having a competent lawyer review the termination clauses. He didn't know the CEO of Apex Holdings was his quiet, supportive wife who was making him dinner every night in our modest 2-bedroom apartment. Over the next 5 years, the church exploded. The congregation grew from 300 people to 10,000. The tithes poured in like a tidal wave of untaxable cash, and as the bank account swelled, the man I married began to rot from the inside out. The humble preacher vanished. In his place emerged a corporate tyrant dripping in designer labels, surrounded by an entourage of yes-men. He began to view me not as his partner, but as an embarrassment. I was too plain. I didn't wear the gaudy, ostentatious diamond rings he wanted to show off. I drove a reliable, 5-year-old sedan instead of a luxury SUV. I was, in his eyes, a relic of his poverty, an anchor dragging down his newfound aristocratic aesthetic. And then, his mother, Eleanor, moved to town, and she brought the ambitious, venomous Chloe with her. That was when the subtle disrespect turned into a coordinated, psychological war. They thought I was weak. They thought I was a helpless, financially dependent little mouse they could casually sweep out of the house. They had absolutely no idea that I wasn't just standing in the church. I owned the ground they walked on. Pardon. The silent suffering and the illusion of holiness. You see, the most dangerous kind of evil doesn't come holding a pitchfork. It comes wrapped in a designer suit, carrying a leather-bound Bible, and smiling with perfectly bleached porcelain veneers. As the church's revenue skyrocketed into the tens of millions, the atmosphere inside the building shifted from a sanctuary of faith into an exclusive country club for the spiritually elite. And at the absolute center of this toxic, shallow ecosystem were 3 people: my husband Marcus, his mother Eleanor, and Chloe. To understand the sheer magnitude of the psychological warfare they waged against me, you have to look past the pulpit and step into the VIP green room, an exclusive, restricted access suite located just behind the main stage. It was here, away from the adoring eyes of the congregation, that the masks came off. It was a Sunday morning, about 6 months before the public humiliation on stage. I was sitting quietly in the corner of the green room, going over the weekly community outreach budget. I was wearing a simple, unbranded, charcoal gray sweater. To Eleanor and Chloe, it looked like a cheap, generic thrift store find. What their uncultured eyes couldn't comprehend was that it was woven from pure, ultra rare vicuña wool, custom tailored in a private atelier in Milan. True wealth whispers. But fake wealth screams. And Eleanor was practically deafening. She swept into the room, draped in an obnoxious, heavily logocentric silk dress that looked less like high fashion and more like a walking billboard for a luxury conglomerate. The heavy, synthetic scent of her trendy department store perfume suffocated the room, masking the stench of her own deep-seated insecurities. "Naomi, darling," Eleanor purred, her voice dripping with that uniquely southern, "bless your heart" venom. She looked me up and down, her heavily Botoxed face contorting into a mask of pity. "Are you really wearing that to the VIP meet and greet? You look like a weary substitute teacher." "Sweetie, not the first lady of a global ministry. People look at you, and they don't see prosperity. They see in struggle. It's so pedestrian." I didn't flinch. I slowly looked up from my tablet, meeting her harsh, judgmental gaze with eyes as cold as a frozen lake. "I dress for comfort, Eleanor, not for a photo shoot." "Well, maybe that's the problem," a sickly sweet voice chimed in. Chloe breezed through the door, clutching a wildly overpriced, limited edition handbag that I happened to know was purchased using the church's pastoral care credit card. She had that aggressive, hyper-groomed look of someone who spent more time curating her Instagram grid than cultivating her character. "Marcus needs someone beside him who matches his energy." "Naomi," Chloe said, leaning against Marcus's leather armchair, running her manicured fingers over the headrest with a sickeningly possessive familiarity. "Image is everything in modern ministry. If you look low vibrational, the congregation feels it. I have some PR packages at home, some really cute, affordable boutique pieces. I could bring them in for you, as a charity donation." She smiled a sharp, predatory grin. It was a calculated, deliberate attempt to make me feel small, to remind me of my place at the bottom of their fabricated social hierarchy, low vibrational. The sheer irony of a woman who was actively sleeping with a married pastor lecturing me about spiritual vibrations. They wanted me to snap. They wanted me to cry, to raise my voice, to become the hysterical, insecure wife, so Marcus would have the perfect excuse to discard me. But I didn't give them the satisfaction. I just offered a small, polite smile. "I appreciate the thought, Clue," I whispered softly, my tone completely unbothered. "But I have exactly what I need." The truth was, the emotional isolation was suffocating. It is a profoundly unique type of agony to stand in a room filled with thousands of people cheering for your husband, while knowing that behind closed doors, he looks at you with absolute disgust. Marcus had mastered the art of passive-aggressive emotional neglect. If we walked into a donor gala, he would physically step ahead of me, leaving me trailing behind him like an unwanted shadow. When I spoke, he would check his watch. When I asked about the church's sudden shift toward hypercapitalism, he would gaslight me with holy rhetoric. "You lack the vision, Naomi." He had hissed at me one evening in the driveway, leaning against his brand-new, leased matte black SUV. He looked in disgust at my reliable, 5-year-old sedan parked next to it. "God is expanding my territory. You're still thinking like a peasant. You're holding me back with this poverty mindset." A poverty mindset. I had to physically bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing in his face. He was lecturing a woman whose personal stock portfolio generated more passive income before breakfast than his church collected in a month. But I swallowed the pride. I swallowed the rage. Why? Because a chess grandmaster never tips the board when they are losing a single pawn. They wait. They observe. They let the opponent get arrogant, overextend their pieces, and expose their king. And Marcus was getting incredibly sloppy. The blatant disrespect from Eleanor and Chloe wasn't just a sign of their terrible character. It was a symptom of a much deeper, more rotten disease, infecting the church's foundation. People who are suddenly arrogant are usually hiding something massive. Their inflated egos were a smokescreen. The extravagant spending, the constant missionary trips to Dubai and Paris, the sudden influx of heavily guarded VIP donors, none of the math was mathing. They treated me like I was invisible. They treated me like a piece of useless furniture that couldn't hear, see, or understand the complex adult world they thought they were operating in. That was their fatal error. Because when people think you are invisible, they stop hiding their sins. They leave their financial portfolios open on their desks. They leave their encrypted church-issued phones unlocked on the kitchen counter. They have hushed conversations in the hallway, completely ignoring the quiet woman watering the ficus plant nearby. The pain of my husband's betrayal was real. It burned like a white-hot ember in the center of my chest. But I didn't let the fire consume me. I used it to forge a weapon. I stopped being a wife, and I became an investigator. I retreated into the shadows of my own life, and I began to pull at the loose threads of Marcus's empire. I didn't know exactly what I was going to find. I just knew that a lifestyle this lavish, built on a foundation this corrupt, I had to be leaving a paper trail. I stepped out of the VIP green room that Sunday, leaving Eleanor and Chloe to cackle over their hollow, leased luxury. I walked down the long, carpeted hallway toward the executive administrative wing. The offices were empty. The sanctuary was loud with the sound of Marcus's booming voice, completely masking the soft click of the master keycard. I swiped against the door of the chief financial officer's suite. It was time to see exactly how much expanding of territory my husband was really doing. Part 3. The Awakening and the Shadow Audit. The heavy, custom-milled mahogany door of the chief financial officer's suite clicked shut behind me, sealing me in a vacuum of utter silence. Outside these walls, the muffled, rhythmic thumping of the sanctuary's bass speakers vibrated through the floorboards. Marcus was currently pacing the stage, delivering a fiery sermon on the virtues of sacrifice and tithing. The irony was so thick, you could have cut it with a scalpel. I stood in the center of the dark office, letting my eyes adjust to the shadows. The room smelled of expensive leather polish and the faint, lingering odor of premium cigar smoke, a blatant violation of the building's fire code. But rules are rarely enforced upon the people who write them. I didn't break into the office. I didn't need to. When I secretly funded the construction of this compound through my family's trust 5 years ago, I personally oversaw the installation of the IT infrastructure. I knew the master override codes for the biometric locks, and I knew the backdoor IP addresses for every server in the building. As far as the system was concerned, I was a ghost. I slid into the CFO's high-backed ergonomic chair, woke up his dual-monitor workstation, and bypassed the secondary firewall with a string of keystrokes that felt like muscle memory. I had grown up in the private boardrooms of New York's elite real estate tycoons. I learned to read complex amortization schedules and offshore routing protocols before I learned how to drive. Financial ledgers were my native language. The screen illuminated my face with a cold, pale light. I opened the master church accounts. At first glance, the general ledger looked immaculate. The CFO was a clever man, meticulously categorizing incoming tithes, building fund donations, and operational expenses to create a flawless illusion of fiscal responsibility. It was the perfect facade for a charity audit, but I wasn't looking at the surface. I was looking for the shadow accounts. I was looking for the bleed. It took me less than 12 minutes to find the first hidden trapdoor. Deep within the Global Outreach and Ministry Expansion subfolder, there was a recurring outgoing wire transfer labeled as logistical support. The money was being funneled into a private, limited liability company registered in Delaware. I cross-referenced the LLC's registration data with public corporate records using a secure VPN. The sole proprietor of that LLC was Chloe. My eyes scanned the digitized bank statements. Every month, an exorbitant media consulting fee was being deposited directly into the pocket of my husband's 24-year-old mistress. But it didn't stop there. I began pulling up the expense reports attached to the church's highest-tier corporate credit cards. The narrative of their betrayal unfolded before me, not in love letters or secret text messages, but in hard, undeniable, alphanumeric data. There were charges for 5-star private villa rentals in St. Libre, Bart's, booked exactly during the week. Chloe had proudly posted on her social media about taking a solitary spiritual fasting retreat. There were receipts for artisan-crafted leather goods, exotic skin handbags, and thousands of dollars dropped at high-end cosmetic dermatology clinics, all categorized under pastoral grooming and wardrobe. And then, there was Eleanor. I found a completely separate discretionary fund labeled Widow's Benevolent Stipend. Eleanor wasn't a widow. She was twice divorced and currently dating a retired golf pro. Yet the church was quietly hemorrhaging tens of thousands of dollars a month to cover her luxury condo lease, her country club membership, and her shockingly high, undocumented gambling debts at a VIP casino just across the state line. I leaned back in the leather chair, staring at the glowing numbers until they blurred. A lesser woman might have broken down right then and there. A different kind of wife would have taken screenshots, burst onto the sanctuary stage, and screamed her lungs out in a hysterical fit of betrayed rage. But as I sat in the quiet dark of that office, I didn't feel the urge to cry. I didn't feel sorrow. I felt a profound, chilling clarity. I thought of the single mothers in the congregation who worked double shifts, slipping crumpled $20 bills into the offering plates because Marcus had convinced them that their financial sacrifice would heal their sick children. I thought of the elderly pensioners living on fixed incomes, writing checks they couldn't afford because they genuinely believed they were funding orphanages and global water projects. Instead, they were funding Chloe's synthetic wardrobe, Eleanor's roulette habits, and Marcus's God complex. They were parasites, feeding off the desperate faith of vulnerable people, and I was the one who had unwittingly built the very host body they were infecting. I inserted a heavily encrypted, thumb-sized drive into the terminal port and began a mass, untraceable extraction of every PDF, every wire transfer receipt, and every shadow ledger on the server. I downloaded the entire anatomy of their fraud. I wiped my digital footprints, shut down the monitors, and left the office exactly as I had found it. The ghost vanished back into the shadows. By the time the church service ended and Marcus was doing his holy, charismatic handshakes in the lobby, I was already sitting in my modest sedan in the farthest corner of the VIP parking lot. I locked the doors. I pulled out my phone and dialed a highly secure ender. Unlisted number. It rang twice before it was answered. "Arthur," I said softly, my voice devoid of any emotion. Arthur was the senior wealth manager of my family's private trust. A ruthless, brilliant man who viewed corporate warfare as a spectator sport. "Naomi." His crisp, patrician voice echoed through the speaker. "It's Sunday morning. You usually don't call the war room on a Sunday. The grace period is over." "Arthur," I whispered, staring through the windshield at Marcus's pristine, matte black SUV parked near the entrance. "I need you to deploy the wolves. I want a full, aggressive forensic accounting team operating under the guise of our holding company. Tell them they are conducting a routine, mandatory landlord compliance audit as per Section 4 of the commercial lease agreement." Arthur chuckled. A low, predatory sound. "Are we finally dismantling the false prophet, my dear?" "We're not just dismantling him, Arthur," I replied, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. "I want the financial oxygen in that building slowly siphoned out. I want their personal accounts monitored. I want every single dollar they stole, tracked, and flagged. And most importantly, I want them to feel completely, utterly safe until the very moment the floor collapses beneath them. Consider the trap set, Naomi. The auditors will be relentless." I hung up the phone. The warm morning sun beat down on the hood of my car, but inside my chest, there was only ice. The investigation was complete. The evidence was secured. The emotional tether to the man I thought I married had been brutally, permanently severed. Marcus, Chloe, and Eleanor thought they were playing a high-stakes game of manipulation against a naive, docile housewife. They didn't realize they had just invited an apex predator to the table. And in the world of true, generational wealth, we don't throw tantrums when we are betrayed. We bankrupt you. Par quatre. The web of lies and the trap is set. There is a profound, almost intoxicating power in knowing exactly how your enemy is going to destroy themselves. The spider doesn't chase the fly. It simply weaves a flawless, invisible geometry in the air and waits for the fly's own frantic arrogance to do the rest of the work. Over the next 3 months, my life became a masterclass in psychological compartmentalization, to the outside world, and more importantly, to Marcus. I was exactly who I had always been. The quiet, subservient, slightly dim-witted wife who lacked the intellectual capacity to understand his grand, spiritual vision. I cooked his meals. I ironed his bespoke, custom-tailored suits. I smiled politely at the church board meetings while he condescendingly explained basic financial concepts to me. Concepts I had learned in my family's private wealth management seminars when I was 12 years old. It was agonizing, yet entirely necessary. I needed his ego to swell to its absolute maximum capacity. I needed him so blinded by his own megalomania that he wouldn't notice the legal snare tightening around his ankles. One evening, Marcus came home late. The heavy, unmistakable scent of expensive amber and jasmine perfume. Chloe's signature scent clung to the lapels of his jacket. He didn't even try to hide it anymore. He tossed his keys onto the marble kitchen island, barely acknowledging my presence as I stood by the stove, stirring a pot of soup. "I have a massive media expansion meeting tomorrow," he announced, loosening his silk tie with a heavy sigh that was meant to convey the tragic burden of his own importance. "Chloe secured a private investor dinner. We're discussing syndicating the sermons on a national broadcast network. The Lord is opening doors. Naomi, massive doors." He leaned against the counter, looking at me with that familiar, thinly veiled disgust. "You should probably stay home tomorrow. These investors, they are high society people, visionaries. I need someone by my side who speaks their language. Chloe just has a natural instinct for high net worth networking. You understand, don't you?" "Of course, Marcus," I replied, keeping my voice soft, submissive, and perfectly even. I carefully poured the soup into a porcelain bowl and set it in front of him. "You and Chloe make a very effective team. I wouldn't want to get in the way of the vision." He smiled. A smug, self-satisfied smirk. "Exactly. I'm glad you're finally realizing your limitations." What Marcus didn't know, as he sat at my kitchen table eating the dinner I cooked for him, was that the private investors Chloe was allegedly meeting with didn't exist. I had already tracked the digital itinerary for their business trip. They weren't going to a boardroom. They had booked a luxury penthouse suite at a 5-star hotel 3 cities over, paid for entirely by the church's emergency relief fund. And more importantly, he didn't know that while he was busy playing the visionary king, my attorneys were rewriting the laws of his kingdom. Behind the scenes, the trap was being meticulously set. I spent my days in secure, encrypted video conferences with Arthur and my family's elite legal team in New York. We weren't just planning a divorce. A divorce would only give him half of our marital assets and allow him to keep his lucrative position at the church. I didn't want half. I wanted total, scorched earth annihilation. The secret weapon was the commercial lease agreement Marcus had signed 5 years ago with my shell company, Apex Holdings. Because he was so desperate for the building, and because he assumed the mysterious corporate landlord was a benevolent billionaire donor, he never had a competent real estate lawyer review the fine print. He had signed a strict triple-net lease with an aggressive moral turpitude and fiduciary breach clause. In high-level commercial real estate, this means the tenant is not only responsible for all building expenses, but the landlord has the absolute, unilateral right to instantly terminate the lease, seize all assets on the property, and evict the tenant if there is any verified evidence of financial mismanagement, fraud, or illegal activity on the premises. We have them dead to rights. Naomi, Arthur reported during one of our secure briefings. His voice was laced with the icy thrill of a corporate shark smelling blood in the water. The forensic accounting team disguised themselves as standard corporate compliance officers. Your husband's CFO was so arrogant, he practically handed them the shadow ledgers. The embezzlement Marcus has cross-collateralized the church's operating accounts to secure personal loans. He is legally exposed on multiple federal levels. And the eviction protocols, I asked, staring out the window of my private home office, watching Marcus's leased luxury SUV gleaming in the driveway. Ironclad, Arthur confirmed. The moment you give the green light, we execute the reversion clause. The entire property, including the multi-million-dollar audio-visual equipment, the broadcasting servers, and the private green rooms, legally reverts back to Apex Holdings. He won't even be allowed to take his ergonomic desk chair. The snare was set. All I had to do was wait for the perfect moment to pull the rope. Their arrogance only accelerated the timeline. The disrespect from Eleanor and Chloe reached new absurd heights. Chloe began strutting through the church hallways wearing a massive, bespoke rose gold timepiece. She openly flaunted it in front of the congregation, claiming it was a gift from a blessed sponsor. I knew for a fact, down to the exact decimal point on the stolen wire transfer, that the watch was purchased using the donations collected from the youth ministry's summer camp drive. They thought they were invincible. They thought the massive walls of the megachurch shielded them from consequence. Eleanor even had the audacity to corner me in the church foyer one Sunday, sneering at my simple leather flats while adjusting her illegally funded designer sunglasses. "You really should step down gracefully, Naomi," Eleanor whispered maliciously, leaning in close so only I could hear. "Marcus is outgrowing you. A man of his stature needs a queen who can wear the crown, not a peasant who is afraid of the throne." I looked deeply into Eleanor's heavily contoured, aging face. I felt a fleeting, microscopic drop of pity for her, not because I cared about her, but because she was so profoundly ignorant of the avalanche hanging silently above her head. "You're absolutely right, Eleanor," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, cold and smooth as polished marble. "Every kingdom needs a true owner. And it's almost time for the landlord to collect the rent." She frowned, clearly confused by the metaphor, lacking the intellect to decode the threat. She just rolled her eyes and walked away, her heels clicking against the imported tile floor. I watched her walk away, a dark, satisfied calm washing over me. The web of lies they had spun was perfectly complete. They had wrapped themselves entirely in a cocoon of fraud, ego, and stolen money. They felt completely safe. It was finally time to make them bleed. Par cinq. The slow bleed, cutting the strings. True destruction is an art form. Amateurs use a sledgehammer to smash a glass house, creating a chaotic, messy spectacle. Professionals, we simply alter the atmospheric pressure from the outside and watch the glass implode on its own. I didn't want to destroy Marcus in one swift, merciful strike. I wanted him to feel the exact same slow, suffocating isolation he had subjected me to for years. I wanted him to watch his golden, counterfeit empire turn to ash in his hands. Dollar by dollar. Welcome to the slow bleed. It began on a Tuesday evening. Marcus was hosting a highly publicized, exclusive dinner with 3 influential megachurch pastors from out of state at the city's most prestigious, reservation-only steakhouse. This was his element. He loved playing the benevolent spiritual godfather, aggressively flexing his fabricated wealth by ordering imported decades-old Cabernet and dry-aged Wagyu for the entire table. He thrived on the worship of his peers. I was sitting comfortably in my quiet living room, sipping a cup of organic chamomile tea, when my encrypted tablet chimed. A secure notification popped up from Apex Holdings' asset management portal. I smiled, tapped a single biometric key, and instantly froze the church's primary corporate discretionary account. Back at the restaurant, the waiter approached Marcus with a discreet silver tray holding the bill. Marcus, mid-sentence in a boastful story about his global vision, casually dropped his heavy tuta. Metal Church-issued executive credit card onto the tray without even glancing at the total. 10 minutes later, the manager appeared. Not the waiter. The manager. He leaned down and whispered those 3 terrifying words that a man of Marcus's fragile, narcissistic stature fears more than death itself. Card declined. Sir Marcus, of course, laughed it off as a trivial banking error. He smoothly reached into his tailored suit jacket and handed over his secondary personal platinum card. Declined. A third card. Declined. I could vividly picture the exact shade of humiliating ardei, blotchy red creeping up his neck. The absolute agony of having to awkwardly smile and ask his rival pastors to cover a $5,000 dinner bill for a narcissist whose entire identity is wrapped in the illusion of limitless prosperity. Public financial impotence is a wound that cuts deeper than flesh. It was a humiliating blow to his ego. But it was only the beginning. Marcus was merely the appetizer. The next morning, I calmly targeted Chloe's oxygen supply. She was at a high-end luxury boutique downtown, attempting to purchase a rare, exotic leather tote bag, a superficial accessory that cost more than what a hard-working leather tote bag middle-class family earns in an entire year. She confidently swiped her card, expecting the usual seamless transaction fueled by stolen tithes. Insufficient funds. She called her private banking concierge, practically screaming at the customer service representative in a shrill, entitled voice. She was swiftly informed that all wire transfers from the church's Global Outreach LLC had been retroactively flagged by an anonymous internal audit for severe fraudulent activity. Her accounts were completely locked, pending a comprehensive federal compliance review. I watched her unravel from a distance. Chloe thrived entirely on the illusion of elite status. When you strip a gold digger of her gold, all you have left is a desperate, unpolished stone, drowning in a sea of unpaid invoices. She began frantically texting Marcus, demanding cash, panicking about her luxury apartment rent, her luxury car lease, and her expensive aesthetic maintenance appointments. The sickeningly sweet harmony of their illicit affair instantly began to rot. Romance is incredibly fragile when it is exclusively funded by embezzled money. Then it was Eleanor's turn. I didn't just freeze her widow's benevolence stipend. I instructed my legal team to initiate a brutal corporate clawback protocol. A clawback is a beautiful, terrifying legal maneuver where a trust forcefully retrieves unauthorized funds that were previously distributed. Her elite country club membership was abruptly and publicly suspended for non-payment while she was sitting in the dining room. But the real masterstroke was the casino. I had my team anonymously forward a verified financial tip to the VIP credit manager at her favorite gambling establishment across the state line, letting them know her primary source of income had just been permanently severed. By Friday, the walls were aggressively closing in. The house of cards was collapsing in real time, and the sheer, unadulterated panic vibrating through the church's executive wing was palpable. They couldn't go public with their sudden financial liquidity crisis, because doing so would instantly expose their massive embezzlement operation to the congregation and the authorities. They were trapped in a burning building of their own making, absolutely terrified to scream for help. The psychological tension finally snapped on Saturday afternoon inside Marcus's private home study. I was supposedly upstairs, quietly folding laundry like the obedient housewife they thought I was. In reality, I was standing perfectly still on the carpeted landing, listening to the glorious symphony of them tearing each other apart. "What do you mean you don't have the cash?" Chloe shrieked, her voice completely stripped of its usual, practiced sweetness. "My accounts are frozen. Marcus, the bank says I'm under investigation for receiving unauthorized corporate funds. You told me this money was clean. You told me I was protected. Keep your voice down," Marcus hissed, his tone dripping with exhaustion and raw panic. "It's a glitch in the accounting software. The CFO is figuring it out with the bank. You just need to be patient and stop acting so hysterical." "Patient," Eleanor chimed in, her voice trembling with frantic desperation. "The casino just called my personal cell phone. Marcus, they are threatening to send private debt collectors to the church lobby if I don't settle my marker by Monday morning. I cannot be humiliated like this. You need to fix this immediately. You are the lead pastor." "I am trying," Marcus roared, the sudden sound of heavy glass shattering against a wall, echoing violently through the hallway. The illusion of the holy, unbothered, visionary spiritual leader was entirely gone. He was no longer a king. He was just a terrified blank, broke fraud who was finally realizing that the infinite well of stolen money had suddenly run dry. They were turning on each other like feral, starving animals. The fake loyalty they had built on a foundation of deceit evaporated the exact second the cash flow stopped, and the most beautiful part of it all, they didn't even suspect me. I was completely invisible to them. They were too busy blaming the banks, blaming the CFO, and viciously blaming each other. I quietly walked back into my bedroom, picked up my phone, and sent another encrypted message to Arthur in New York. "The patients are bleeding out. The internal infection is complete. It's time to deliver the terminal diagnosis. Parsis. The eviction notice. Cracking the foundation. There is a distinct, deeply satisfying sound that a certified legal courier envelope makes when it hits a mahogany desk. It's a flat, heavy thud. The sound of absolute, undeniable finality. It was Monday morning. Exactly 48 hours after the financial bloodbath had begun in Marcus's study, the torrential downpour of reality was about to wash away the last remaining pillars of his fraudulent kingdom. Through Arthur, my lead financial attorney, an absolute shark of a wealth manager, I had full surveillance over the structural collapse. Marcus had been summoned to an emergency, mandatory meeting at the downtown branch of the commercial bank, where he had illegally and arrogantly taken out a massive $8 million line of credit. Listen closely, because this is where the arrogance of a narcissist becomes their own executioner. Marcus had used the church building, the 50-acre property, and the state-of-the-art broadcasting equipment as collateral for that loan. He genuinely believed that because his name was on the church's letterhead, he owned the dirt beneath it. He walked into that bank boardroom wearing a custom-tailored Italian wool suit, flanked by his sweaty, panicked CFO. He expected a minor administrative scolding. He expected to turn on his signature pastoral charm. Quote, a few scriptures about the season of financial testing, and walk out with a 6-month extension. Instead, he was met by 3 senior bank executives and a very grim corporate attorney. Arthur gave me the exact transcript of the meeting later that afternoon. The lead bank executive slid a thin, single-page document across the table. It wasn't an extension. It was a notice of immediate default. Pastor Marcus, the executive had said, devoid of any reverence or warmth. We ran a routine deep-dive title search on your collateral, triggered by multiple flagged fraud alerts on your corporate accounts over the weekend. We discovered a fatal discrepancy. You do not own the megachurch property. You are merely a tenant. That's absurd. Marcus had practically yelled, his perfectly groomed facade cracking. My ministry built that sanctuary. I am the head of the organization. The bank's attorney didn't even blink. He slid a second, much thicker document across the table. It was the commercial lease agreement Marcus had blindly signed 5 years ago. Officially stamped and notarized by my shell company. You are a tenant under Apex Holdings LLC, the attorney clarified, his voice like grinding ice. And as of 8:00 a.m. this morning, Apex Holdings has formally executed the moral turpitude clause in your contract, citing gross financial mismanagement, embezzlement, and unauthorized cross-collateralization. Your lease is permanently terminated. You have been legally served with a 72-hour notice of eviction. Marcus had frozen, the color draining from his face until he looked like a wax figure melting under a heat lamp. Because you no longer legally occupy the property, your collateral is void. The executive finished, delivering the fatal blow. We are calling the $8 million loan. The balance is due immediately. If you cannot produce the funds, we will initiate federal asset seizure protocols by Friday. Marcus didn't drive his matte black luxury SUV back to the church. He practically fled to our house. I was standing in the kitchen when he burst through the front door. The afternoon sun was streaming through the windows, casting long, peaceful shadows across the marble countertops. I was calmly, rhythmically slicing organic vegetables for a light dinner. Chop chop, chop. The steady sound of the steel knife hitting the cutting board was the only metronome in the room. Marcus looked like a man who had just looked directly into the eyes of a ghost. His custom suit was wrinkled. His tie was violently loosened. He was sweating profusely, his hands trembling as he frantically paced the length of the living room, clutching his phone to his ear. He was trying to call the mysterious CEO of Apex Holdings. He was trying to call Arthur. Please. You have to let me speak to the chairman. Marcus begged into the phone, his voice cracking with a pathetic, high-pitched desperation I had never heard before. The booming baritone of the great, visionary pastor was completely gone, replaced by the whimpering of a cornered rat. Tell him it's a misunderstanding. Tell him I can double the rent. I just need time. If I lose that building, the bank will destroy me. I stood merely 15 feet away. meticulously dicing a bell pepper. Chop, chop. Chop through the faint audio bleeding from his phone's earpiece. I could hear Arthur's cold, aristocratic voice. Apex Holdings does not negotiate with evicted tenants. Marcus, the chairman has no interest in your excuses. You have until Sunday morning to remove your personal effects from the property. After that, the locks are changed, and the authorities will be called. The line went dead. Marcus dropped the phone. It clattered against the hardwood floor. He collapsed onto the expensive, imported leather sofa, burying his face in his trembling hands. The psychological weight of utter ruin was crushing him in real time. Suddenly, the front door violently swung open again. It was Chloe and Eleanor. They had been tipped off by the CFO. "Is it true?" Chloe screamed, her face flushed with rage, her expensive, synthetic hair extensions looking uncharacteristically messy. "The CFO said the bank is seizing everything. He said we're being evicted." "Marcus, tell me this is a lie." Eleanor was right behind her, hyperventilating, clutching her designer handbag like a life preserver on a sinking ship. "My condo lease is tied to the church's corporate guarantor. Marcus, if the church goes bankrupt, they will throw me out on the street. The casino already sent a collector to my lobby." Marcus slowly looked up at the two women. The two toxic, parasitic entities he had chosen over me. There was no love left in his eyes. There was no spiritual connection. There was only the bitter, toxic hatred of a man realizing he had ruined his life for the illusion of their admiration. "Shut up," Marcus roared, his voice trembling with manic rage. "Just shut up, both of you. It's gone. The building, the accounts, the broadcast deals. It's all gone." The landlord terminated the lease. Chloe stared at him, her lip trembling. The realization that she had tethered her youth and her reputation to a sinking anchor finally dawned on her. She didn't offer him comfort. She didn't hold his hand. She looked at him with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You told me you were a king," she spat, venom dripping from every syllable. "You're nothing but a broke, fraudulent loser." She spun on her high heels and stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard the framed pictures on the wall rattled. Eleanor just stood there, weeping selfish, pathetic tears for her lost country club memberships and her gambling funds. And through it all, I remained standing at the kitchen island, invisible, silent. I wiped the blade of my knife with a clean towel and looked at Marcus. "Is everything all right, dear?" I asked, my voice smooth, quiet, and perfectly innocent. "You seem stressed. Do you want me to cancel dinner?" He slowly turned to look at me, completely shattered. He didn't see the apex predator staring back at him. He still just saw his plain Berfida's location. Uneducated, subservient wife. "Just leave me alone." "Naomi," he whispered hoarsely, defeated. "You wouldn't understand. I have to do one last Sunday service. A massive emergency offering. It's my only chance to raise the cash before the bank freezes my personal assets on Monday. I have to get on that stage one last time." A cold, dark smile formed in the very depths of my soul, though my face remained a mask of perfectly blank concern. "Yes, Marcus," I thought to myself. "Get on that stage, gather the entire congregation, turn on the massive LED screens one last time, because the landlord is coming to church on Sunday. Percept, the climax and the ultimate flex." Sunday morning arrived with the heavy, suffocating tension of a looming thunderstorm. The megachurch was packed to its maximum capacity. 10,000 people filled the velvet-lined auditorium seats, completely unaware that they were sitting inside a beautifully constructed financial tomb. Marcus was desperate. He was functioning purely on the adrenaline of a cornered predator. He knew the bank was moving to seize his personal assets by Monday morning. This Sunday service, this emergency vision offering, was his absolute last. Pathetic attempt to squeeze the final drops of liquid cash from his congregation before the entire illusion collapsed. And that brings us exactly back to where this story began. The 80-foot LED screens washed the room in a blinding glow. Marcus stood at the center of the pulpit. He delivered his treacherous speech, his voice dripping with that synthetic, practiced vulnerability. He told the thousands of people looking up at him that my spiritual journey was no longer aligned with his grand vision. He introduced Chloe, draped in her fast fashion dress, as the new spiritual mother of the house. The collective gasp of the congregation rippled through the massive room. I sat in the front row, my hands neatly folded over my simple cashmere skirt. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I pulled out my phone and sent that single, devastating message to my attorney. Arthur, in New York. Initiate the reversion clause. Freeze all operational accounts. Lock the doors by midnight. I hit send. Then I put my phone back into my leather tote bag. Everyone expected me to run. Chloe looked down at me from the stage, her lips curling into a smug, victorious sneer. Marcus wouldn't even meet my eyes. He was already signaling the ushers to start passing the offering buckets. I took a slow, deep breath, smoothing the fabric of my skirt. And then, I stood up. I didn't walk down the center aisle toward the exit. I turned, squared my shoulders, and began walking directly up the carpeted stairs toward the pulpit. The massive sanctuary fell into a dead process. Absolute silence. You could have heard a pin drop on the imported oak floorboards. 10,000 pairs of eyes tracked my every movement. Marcus frowned, his forced pastoral smile dropping completely. He quickly covered the microphone with his hand and stepped toward me, his eyes flashing with desperate, venomous anger. "Naomi, what are you doing?" he hissed, his voice trembling with manic rage. "Get off this stage immediately. You are making a fool of yourself. The security team will drag you out if you don't turn around right now." I didn't stop. I walked right past Chloe, the sheer force of my cold, unbothered presence causing her to instinctively take a step back. I walked right up to Marcus. He was sweating. He smelled of expensive cologne and pure, unadulterated fear. Without a word, I reached out and firmly pulled the microphone from his trembling hand. He was too stunned to resist. I turned to face the congregation. For the first time in 5 years, the quiet, subservient wife spoke into the main audio feed. My voice, calm, steady, and sharp as a scalpel, echoed through the state-of-the-art acoustic system I had secretly purchased. "Good morning," I said, my tone ringing with absolute authority. "Marcus has just shared his vision for the future of this building. But unfortunately, as the legal owner of this property, I must inform you that his lease has been permanently terminated." A wave of confused murmurs swept through the crowd. Marcus lunged forward to grab the microphone back. But the lead security director, a man whose paycheck was quietly signed by my family's trust, stepped out of the shadows and firmly placed a hand on Marcus's chest, holding him back. "For 5 years," I continued, my voice echoing like thunder in the silent hall, "you have been told that this church was funded by a miraculous, anonymous corporate donor. That donor was a blind trust called Apex Holdings. And I am the chief executive officer." I reached into my pocket, pulled out a small electronic remote I had synced to the church's master server, and pressed a single button. Instantly, the massive, 80-foot LED screens behind me went black. A second later, a high-resolution image of the commercial property deed materialized on the screens, stamped, notarized, and clearly bearing my legal name as the primary trustee. Marcus stopped fighting the security guard. The blood instantly drained from his face. His knees visibly buckled. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. The mysterious, ruthless billionaire landlord he had been desperately begging for mercy wasn't a faceless corporation in New York. It was the woman he had treated like garbage in his own kitchen. "You did not give your hard-earned money to a spiritual ministry," I said, looking out at the single mothers, the elderly pensioners, and the working-class families who had been bled dry by his greed. I pressed the button again. The screens shifted. The flawless financial facade was ripped away, exposing the grotesque, rotting core of their empire for the entire world to see. High-definition images of the shadow ledgers filled the screens, wire transfers to Chloe's fraudulent LLC, receipts for luxury vacations, Eleanor's staggering, unpaid casino debts funded by the widow's benevolence account. The congregation erupted. The shock morphed into a tidal wave of visceral, righteous anger. People were standing up, shouting, holding their offering envelopes in the air. I turned my back to the crowd and looked directly at Chloe. Her smug arrogance had entirely vanished, replaced by the hollow, terrified stare of a woman realizing she was going to federal prison. She dropped her designer handbag, turned on her heels, and sprinted off the stage, fleeing through the back exit. Then I looked at Marcus, the great visionary, the untouchable narcissist. He was on his knees, weeping uncontrollably, his custom-tailored suit wrinkling as he hyperventilated. The illusion was dead. The false prophet was naked before the world. "You thought I was weak because I chose peace over performance," I whispered, stepping close enough so only he could hear the final, crushing blow. "You thought my silence was ignorance. But true power doesn't need to shout, Marcus. True power just waits for you to hand over the keys to your own destruction." I dropped the microphone onto the stage floor. The heavy thud echoed through the massive speakers. I didn't look back as I walked down the stairs and straight down the center aisle. The congregation parted for me, their anger directed entirely at the stage, their eyes following me with a mixture of absolute shock and profound respect. When I pushed open the heavy glass doors to step out into the bright Sunday sunlight, the flashing red and blue lights of Federal Tax Authority vehicles were already pulling into the VIP parking lot. Arthur never missed a deadline. The authorities were here to sift through the ashes of the empire I had just burned to the ground. Marcus lost everything. His reputation was entirely decimated. His personal assets were seized by the bank the very next morning to cover his fraudulent loans. Chloe turned state's evidence against him to avoid a maximum sentence, exposing even more of his financial crimes. And Eleanor, without the church's stolen funds, she was evicted from her luxury condo and forced to move into a tiny, state-funded apartment, entirely abandoned by her high society friends. As for the building, I transferred the entire 50-acre property into a highly regulated, transparent non-profit trust. We converted the VIP green rooms into a battered women's shelter and the massive sanctuary into a debt-free community college for underprivileged youth. Because when you hold the ultimate power, you don't just destroy the villains. You rebuild the kingdom for the people who actually deserve it. That is how you play the long game. Never let an arrogant narcissist tell you your worth. And never, ever show your hand until you are ready to take the entire table. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt every single ounce of that satisfying karma, I want you to leave a comment below. What was your favorite moment of the revenge? Have you ever dealt with a narcissist who got exactly what they deserved? Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. We have so many more secrets to uncover, and so many more empires to tear down. Until next time, stay strong, stay smart, and always remember, true wealth whispers. Goodbye.